Happy New Year, everybody. I am Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in comic book crime, Orrin Phillips.
Hey, everyone. Happy New Year.
And Mike Farah.
Yo, yo, yo. Happiest of New Year's.
We are the Dollar Bin Bandits, and this is the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And more importantly, it is the first Comic Book Wednesday of 2022. And we are thrilled, absolutely thrilled to kick off our season 2 of the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And what better way to do so than with an interview with who I consider to be comic book royalty, a comic book superstar, if you will, the man, the myth, and the legend himself, Dan Didio. Now, for me, this was absolutely huge. I remember Orrin, he sent me a text. I almost passed out in my kitchen. My kids were wondering like what was going on. This is big for me. I mean, it really right now, I don't think it doesn't really get any bigger than Dan Didio, unless maybe you're Jim Lee, but they're right there. And he'll even say so himself. This was a big interview for me for a couple of reasons. One, this was my first solo, interview with anyone. So I was pretty damn nervous. But more importantly, like I said, this is Dan Didio. I mean, he was the co-publisher of DC Comics with Jim Lee, and he was instrumental in really shaping the DC universe for the past 15, 20 years or so.
Yeah, you did a brilliant job with him. The rapport between you guys was great. You look at the amount of stress he must have been under. Anyone who takes that position, running with the DC Comics like that, trying to get the books out, trying to put the best books out, the art, the stories. And a lot of people forget, he was a great writer too. And really just an incredible guy to talk to. And it's a great interview.
Yeah, Joe, hats off to you. You knocked it out of the park on your first solo turn. I thought it's a great interview. I think everybody's going to really love all the topics you get into. As Orrin said, interesting to hear some of his writing parts, Superboy, Metal Men, Phantom Stranger. And yeah, he, besides all of that daily stress, he also did a lot of innovative stuff. He brought back the weekly comic with 52 and then Countdown, which had a lot of coordination that had to happen for that to become the success that it was. And then, of course, the new 52, of course, controversial, but still a big swing of the bat under his watch. So let's get to it. You want to hear about him. This is Dan Didio.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks a lot. Thanks for inviting me. I was laughing. I was got invited to dollar bins, and I said, "Boy, the amount of time I've spent in dollar bins, this seemed like my natural place to do a podcast."
Well, let me ask you. So, we ask everyone, and what was your introduction to comic books?
It's funny. You could look at it so many different ways. I mean, when I first was starting to see comics, in the mid 60s, I can point out what books I had, whether it was a Metal Man or a Batman issue that came out when the TV show was on, or a Spider-Man issue when the Spider-Man cartoon was on, or an 80-page giant that we lifted from a barbershop in the local neighborhood, or something like that. I mean, but probably I'd say, you get to about 1970, 71 is when I really started to buy and consumed my life, as I like to say. But, I laugh about the dollar bin joke, but it's the truth. Most of my collection was, as I was buying forward in the 70s, I was also buying backwards in the 70s, trying to get everything from earlier on. So I have this really interesting collection of old comics that all have it scrolled in the corners, 25 cents, 35 cents, because you used to buy it from these bins that they used to write the price on the cover. Right. So, today that'd be sacrilege, but you were looking for everything according to that, and you didn't think twice of it. You just wanted the book in your hand, No,
I agree. Yeah. Were there any particular character that really just jumped out at you or spoke to you that you were fond of?
I was a big Spider-Man fan. And I was also, but on the DC side, which I really sort of started first, it was the House of Secrets, House of Mysteries, Tales of the Unexpected, Ghosts, all books like that's what started me. Swamp Thing was probably my bridge character. Just like on the Marvel side, Zemu the Titan was my bridge character.
That's great.
Taking you from where monsters dwell, where creatures roam, over into the Defenders, and then Hulk, and then out from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, over the past few months or so since doing this, I've forced myself to really go back and start rereading all those older like mystery DC books and horror comics, because they're really fantastic.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I always thought about at DC, and this is just one of those things you think about when you're in the job, is because you're always looking back at the old stuff and going through it. And it was interesting because a lot of the horror line was, or mystery line was run by Joe Orlando, who was art director at the time. And I always looked and said, I always wondered what it would be like if they flipped artists, and the artists that ran on all the horror books and mystery books and more books were on the superhero line, and vice versa. And I wondered what the line would look and feel like if they had gone with that more different, more eclectic, more emerging talent on their books than the guys that were basically there in the trenches for so long,
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because out of a lot of people that we've talked to, they got their feet wet and really cut their teeth in those line of comics before they moved on to the Wonder Womans, the Batmans, the bigger name characters.
Well, that's I think that's one of the things that's been lacking, and one of the things I kept on trying to DC for the longest time is to introduce an anthology book, not because I did like the genre, but that wasn't the sole reason. But it was really to give talent a chance. That's the best way to break talent in. Yeah. And what happens is, when you're doing the anthology books, you're testing to see their quality of storytelling in a very short format. So you can tell a story in 8 pages if you have a beginning, middle, and end in 8 pages, or be able to tell a dynamic story visually in 8 to 11 pages. That shows me that you have a skill set that actually could transfer over nicely you're not taking a big risk on new talent then, but you're giving more people an opportunity to break in, and that way the cream gets to rise to the top. Without those anthologies, you're sort of looking at what people are doing in other companies and then bringing them in and rolling the dice a little bit to see whether or not they can adapt to the style of storytelling and the types of stories that are being done on the bigger lines. So it's an interesting moment. I think a loss of anthology also basically made it a little bit tougher to break in, but the world's changing now, so I think people are getting better chances these days.
Definitely. Now, how did you get your break into the comic book industry professionally?
There's 2 things that are happening independent of other simultaneously. Okay. First one is Jimmy Palmiotti and I got an opportunity following a couple of years of pitching to get onto the Superboy book. So that was if theory, that's the break-in, is that Jimmy and I are co-writing the Superboy comic at DC, and we're on the series. Simultaneously, though, I was looking for a change of opportunity. I was working in the animation field. Mm-hmm. I was doing a lot of flying. I was living on the East Coast. I had an office in Vancouver. I had an office in LA, and I was traveling a lot, and it was wearing me down. So I was looking for some stability on the East Coast, and I had a mutual friend set me up and introduced me to Paul Levitz, who I had known over the years, just coming across him. And as the conversation went, they said basically Paul was looking for somebody with external experience but comic book knowledge. I had comic book knowledge and I had external experience, so the person I was going to meet for dinner actually got up and left me alone with Paul. So basically, I got my first break-in on a blind date with Paul Levitz, if you want to know the truth.
I hope you got him a drink first.
I certainly did. And we basically met about 6 times over a 3 to 4 month period. Wow. And then ultimately, he sort of figured out a position for me in the company, which was rather ambiguous, to be honest with you. And it was extraordinarily frustrating position, because you really had no real authority, but you felt like you had a level of responsibility and you're trying to make things work. But Paul gave me a lot of leeway to learn the job and learn the company, because I never worked in publishing before. So I had spent that first year learning the job, and then I was actually getting ready to move out. And that's when Paul offered me the executive editor position, and I took it, and we're off to the races.
Wow. We talked to Paul, and I never met anyone who really experienced every facet of that industry as much as he did. I mean,
it's fascinating. I mean, it's interesting when you're a fan coming into this, but like I'm not not a gushing fan. I was really a fan of the history of comics. I love the story behind comics. Even when I read comics, I'd be the kid that would look for the sales box information at the end of the year to see how these books sold, and I'd write them all down and compare to see what worked and didn't work. I don't know why, but I just enjoyed that. Just gave me a sense of what was popular and what wasn't. And when I got to DC, I spent so much time just hearing questions, asking questions to Paul about that, and then he set me up with a number of the older talent there. And I got, I spent some time with Julie Schwartz. I spent some time with Dick Giordano. I had known Joe Kubert, so I had spent a lot of time with Joe Kubert, and I actually knew Len Wein and Marv beforehand, so I got a lot of information from them. So I was pulling information from all sources just on the background of the company, so I can help formulate ideas about what worked and what didn't work, and just the rhythm of the business. And it was invaluable over the time,
So for you, coming from animation to comics, was that a bit of a culture shock for you, or was it somewhat of a natural progression? Or
it almost feels like a natural progression. I mean, like I said, when I was working in animation, I was working on ABC children's television, and I had literally had 2 projects in development right before ABC bought Disney and then took over the Saturday morning lineup. But I was developing with Marv Wolfman and I believe Craig Miller, a Thunder Agent series, which I still have the development on that. We had some beautiful art done by Tom Grummett, who I didn't know Tom Grummett at the time, and got to find out who he was. I had done development with Lee Simonson on Metal Men. So I was looking to create a Metal Men Thunder Agents block for ABC Saturday morning, and it was in place, and it was going to be one of the things I was going to pull a trigger on before Disney came in. So I had that love of comics there, and then ultimately when I went to Mainframe Entertainment, I brought a lot of the comic talent with me. So I had Marv working for me, I had Len Wein working for me, I had Christy Marks working for me over at Mainframe. They were a lot of the writers on the shows that I were working on, and what also helped is Brendan McCarthy. Was the designer for Mainframe, one of the art director for Mainframe, and everybody there had comic book love at the company. That's why I connected with them. And the fun part was we used comic book shorthand, when we're doing things, and so we'd sit in a room and we go, I never forgot, we were trying to figure out this visualization, and Brendan's there on this whiteboard just sketching away, and everybody looks at each other and we all nod and we go, doormat moo. Yes, we want doormat moo. Now,
so that's just like a general, that's just a term you guys throw around to mean,
Yeah, exactly. And we're all like, oh yeah, that's what we want. Right. And all of a sudden, and he looks at us and he goes, now I know what you want. And boom, we got the design up on the wall right after that.
Nice. That's awesome. And you worked that was, I think it was Reboot and Transformers you had worked on?
Reboot, Beast Wars. Beast Wars is where I was working on. I always get to seem to be the guys that have to worry about the reinventions. So I got Beast Machines, and then we did a show called Shadow Raiders in Canada. It was called War Planets here in the U.S. Weirdos, and then I strangely, I don't know if it's ironic or not, but strangely, the last show that I had pulled together for Mainframe before leaving it was actually the MTV version of Spider-Man, when the animated series. Yeah, so that was the last thing I pulled together, and then it was one of the last things that and both things Barbie. I was working on Barbie videos.
Hey, I'm not knocking Barbie, because having a daughter, I've had to watch a fair amount of Barbie lately, and I will say, whatever incarnation they have out now on Netflix, it's not for kids. I mean, it is.
Oh wow!
But if you hear it's along the same vein as, say, SpongeBob. If you hear the dialogue, yes, the show is for kids. But the dialogue, there are so many like hidden jokes for the parents.
Oh yeah. I mean, hilarious. But that goes back to Looney Tunes days. I mean, that's why they're able to be watched over and over again, is because the jokes work on multiple levels for different age groups. So that's what's fun about it.
It is, definitely. So at DC, you had a chance to work on some very specific characters. And I was curious if you got to choose those, or you just were, I don't know, like you worked on Phantom Stranger, which I adored that character.
Me personally.
Yes, you personally.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes. I mean, professionally, you've worked on you've touched everything, so it's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think by the time I was out of there, I think I got a chance to bring back or reintroduce or do something with at least 99% of the DC characters. We turned over every rock humanly imaginable, which was one of the real most awesome jobs possible. When you're actually sitting in a room talking about Jason's quest, you're basically at the bottom of that barrel.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. So as for the ones that you wrote, like you said, you wrote Superboy, were those the ones that you chose specifically, or you were, I don't know, I'm just saying, like you were, filling the need for the content or what have you? I don't know.
It's interesting. In a couple of cases, the way it used to work is I used to build out, I used to sit with editorial, I used to sit with all the writers, and then we'd all talk about everything. And then what would happen every year is I would create a blueprint of what the year was going to be. I'd send it over to Paul. He'd say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then we're off to the races or make changes or whatever we had to do. As it sort of go on, what I wanted to do was I wanted to be involved in a project off to the side a little bit, not involved in the main line, but just something that allowed me to stay involved in the process, so I can always be in contact with the way things were being built within the company. Meaning, I talk to a lot of talent, I talk to a lot of editors, but unless I'm part of that process, I'm so far removed, I'm not really sure how it's working or not working or not, and where problems might lie or where things might work. So the original plan was just to do something, just to stay involved. Also, it scratched a little bit of that creative itch that everybody always seems to have. Yep. Gets me out of everybody else's hair, so to speak, hopefully, for the most part. So I started with Outsiders because at that point they had gone through a couple of iterations, and then I said, you know what, I know this book is going to run its course, so let me just jump on it and run its course. In my mind, I always go back to guys like Frank Miller and Jim Starlin, and they got these books that nobody wanted and got a chance to have some fun with it, and that's sort of what I was trying to do too in that particular case. When it came to things like Phantom Stranger, these are books that are honestly, the take on Phantom Stranger and even with Metal Men were very personal to me, the things that I really wanted to execute in a way that I just didn't want to hand off directions to folks. I really wanted to be hands-on. And we've been trying to get Metal Men off the ground for a while, and we did a couple of launches and they all just never clicked. And Metal Men's possibly my favorite characters at DC, possibly. And I had always in my mind had ideas for Metal Men back to when I was developing it at ABC. Mm-hmm. So I always wanted to roll up the sleeves. And, when you feel yourself winding down, I figured that this was the one thing I needed to do before everything was done, and I was glad to be able to get that as possibly in the final project of the DC Comics, which was great. But Phantom Stranger was very particular because I wanted to be involved in New 52, the world of that taking place at the moment. I knew the Trinity Sin was going to kick off, and I wanted to be involved in a little bit there. So that's why Phantom Stranger was a fun one. And I had I really enjoyed that book. I enjoyed that book. And the shame of all these things is that the real job just is too consuming, being the publisher and all those others was just too consuming. Right. And I just couldn't keep up, to be honest with you. And I didn't want to be the guy that was running late because that's the guy that I was trying to stop from happening. So I had I was always trying to lead by example. So the only way I could lead by example is taking myself off these books on occasion, so it was interesting.
In reference to Phantom Stranger, I love that origin that you built for him. And, up until that point, it seemed like for every new version of Phantom Stranger, there either wasn't a clear origin or maybe it was retcon or what have you. But the fact that you kind of leaned into this biblical origin, what I thought was it was fantastic. It really was.
Oh, good. I love it. Yeah, I really wanted to give him, he needed something. He needed an anchor. Here's the thing. What we have to realize is that we could still write him a mystery to everyone else, but the reader has to have the knowledge of the background to understand the story, to relate with them,
Mhm.
you know, or else he's just walking through scenes. And I find that when you don't have an anchor or something to establish who the character is, the interpretations of that character become wild. They become anything you want it to be, because it can be, because there's nothing holding him in place. So he can do or manage anything. And that's not what you want. If you want a character on an ongoing basis, you have to be able to root for him and feel for him and care for him. So that was essential to me, because I thought the concept is a brilliant one. And I just love that character to death. And I wanted to make sure that people cared about him. And that seemed to be the way to go for it, is to build this world of what was happening there. And I'll be honest with you, I saw what, was it the same time? Yeah, it was. I want to say it was around there. What Tom King did with Vision, I think was brilliant. You know what I mean? It was really smart, really smart. And again, that's a character that's robotic or an android, and you got this really emotional connection to him. And you need to have those anchors for these characters that just seem to be present more so than than have any sort of depth to it. And once you give him that depth, you could still play the mystery. He could still be a phantom stranger. He could be a stranger to everyone, just not to the reader,
Right. Yeah. No, I always thought, whenever they showed that group of and the name escapes me, every once in a while they would, if there was a big event, there would be a few panels of this group of superpowered beings like Ganthet, High Father,
right,
and Phantom Stranger was in there. And I always thought, up until I read yours, like, okay, well, he seems a bit out of place, because you have all these guys. You have the Spectre, who, okay, you kind of know his deal. He's anchored by a human being, but there's a guy with a top hat and a coat. So why is he among this group? So that your origin really kind of made sense in that vein.
And also, if you want to be even more truthful, they had a lot of guys in top hats and coats, DC.
Fair enough. But if you're gonna be hanging out with High Father, like, change your outfit. No.
That's the reason also, because there's a lot of things. I used to use the expression to describe the difference between Marvel and DC is proactive and reactive. Okay, Marvel is reactive heroes. They don't really want their powers. They don't really want to do things, but they got them. They understand there's a responsibility. And when the problem comes to them, they go to solve it. But they're not out there on patrol. DC characters proactive. They put on a suit, they get a power. And as soon as they get that power, they go, I'm going to do something good. And they go out on patrol. So if you're going to do that, then you have to give them something unique about them to justify the reasoning on why they're making those choices. And you've got to give them that depth. You've got to give them understanding, and you've got to give them also a different goal for what they're trying to accomplish. Because if they're all trying to do the same thing, then they all trip over each other. And just like your back shelf says, Superman wins at the end of the day. It's very hard to have a superpower team when you have the single most character that can do it all by himself on the team. They can all stay and play cards, and Superman goes out and everybody's good, but you got to find reasons for what's important to people and then play it up. And that's why, once you know who Phantom Stranger is, he had a purpose in that story. He had to basically go constantly relive the issue of betrayal, even though it was for a greater good. He has to constantly betray people, which is just kind of a horrible thing when it's like you want to get past what you're known for, and nobody will let you be anything but yourself. You're constantly being reminded of what your sin is. It's a kind of interesting storyline, especially when you look at the world today.
Definitely. As part of a lot of the projects you were involved in and oversaw, the weekly 52 comic was it was like crack, because there really wasn't any weekly, there hadn't been any weekly comic, at least that I can remember, for the past 15 20 years or more. And it was like crack. I had to get it. How difficult was that to coordinate?
It was insane. Keith Giffen summed it up the best. About halfway through, he says, the only reason why we're selling is just like we're appealing to the NASCAR fans. They're just waiting for us to crash.
Wow.
That's Giffen. That played back to my animation background.
Okay.
What I was most intrigued by was developing a book and story and series that delivered at the speed of our delivery system, which was a weekly delivery system. And because of that, we knew, and we had to figure out what all the challenges were in the course of the process and the making of that book, and address them. And one of the first things I did was I hired Keith as the storyboard guy, because in theory, if the script runs late, you're screwed, because it's only going to take an artist how long to move something, right? So on the other side of the coin, if you have storyboards, you can hand those pages off to different artists, knowing that you're going to be able to tell the story in a way, because they just have to stick to what's on the page. You know what I mean? So you had some flexibility there. So we established that. And then when I built the writing team, I went for very particular people so that they didn't have overlapping skill sets. Jeff was the voice of the current DCU. That's who he was, coming out of Infinite Crisis. He really was the voice of the new DCU. Greg Rucka was the guy who was there also for the DCU that was running at the time, but he was much more grounded. Jeff's a very traditional story superhero guy. Then what we did is we brought Wade in, and he was the more classic superhero guy. So he was the guy that really was able to mine the past and knew the sense of history. And when one guy was pushing the story forward, he was also pulling information from the past and feeding it into there. And then you get Greg, who's very grounded. And on the reverse of Greg was Grant Morrison, who's wild and expansive. So you have these wildly different styles all working together in the same book. And because of that, I was hoping it wouldn't feel so repetitious in every issue, because each guy has his own style to it. And they basically all, excuse me a second, they all cornered off sections of a story that they were looking forward to tell. So that was what's important. And as the story goes, what happened was the original plan, and when I pitched it to Paul, the original plan was to say we did the 1 year later jump. It was to fill in the missing 1 year later. And these guys would say, oh, great, and all that. And then what happened when they organized all the stories from the 1 year later, they realized they didn't have a story, and they basically said, we can't do this. We can't fill in the 1 year later gap. Because we don't have a story to work with, because it's just a lot of loose ideas and there's no thread, no through line, no thread. So I'm like, okay, what do you need? So each one of them crafted their own stories. They worked it out together, and then we went forward. And I realized there was a moment there in 52, and I always say it was the giant hawk girl. I think it was like issue somewhere in the first couple of months of storytelling, which they told a story that was never addressed in the 1 year later. And that was a pivot moment there, because we had to go either stick to what the 1 year later jump did or tell your own tale. And at that moment we said, you know what? Tell your own tale. It's a missing year. We'll figure it out at the end. But because of the sheer momentum and the speed of what these guys are doing, the amount of work that was taking on, we just let it took on a machine of its own. And, in some ways we had to sacrifice the external books to feed that, but it was such an important book for us and such an important run that we wanted to make sure it had a clear run path through to the end. And the fact that we're talking about it now show that we succeeded in that role. So I mean, but it was tough. It was a real hard to. I think for the writers, they told me once, and I didn't realize it until they said it. This is the big miscalculation at the beginning. When you say to somebody, you take a 20-page book and everybody gets 5 pages per week, right? You go to yourself, oh, you're only writing 5 pages. So if you do that 4 times, it's 20 pages equal to a single issue of work. The problem is when you're meeting and discussing and brainstorming and laying out and pacing 5 pages, it takes on the same amount of mental and physical work as an entire book. Wow. So instead of taking on 1 book's worth of work, they all seem to add 4 books worth of work onto this schedule. And that's why everything else started to get rough, because the sheer volume and difficulty of what they were doing. And I think it was Greg that made it even tougher for everybody, because Greg rightfully said, well, if this is a weekly book, then our cliffhangers have to basically pick up a week later. So every cliffhanger had to end where it was basically a week break before they could pick up the story. So it wasn't a clear, like, on page 20 of this issue, this happened, and then 1 second later on page 21 of the first issue, the first page of page 21.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Right.
it was all these crazy mechanics that was involved in it. But at the end of the day, it came together amazingly well, and it became a basis for so much of else we want to do from that point forward. But it's really a wonderful body of work. And
It is.
yeah, and I always have to say this because I never want to forget this. And J.G. Jones is the unsung hero of that. His 52 covers for that series are spectacular. It goes back to what I love, which we don't have much of these days, which are story covers, you know, and you know what I mean? And
Yes.
on top of that, JG would sit in the rooms with the writers as they were brainstorming story, and he would be coming up ideas himself, and he would be sketching. And the infamous story there, the famous story there, is that he actually sketched the Aborigine with Red Tornado's head under his arm. And it wasn't part of the story, and everybody loved it so much they made it part of the story.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned that because, you know, as collectors, you get attracted to the covers because it's what you see, and you're like, oh, well, that's, you know, so and so character, and that's the artwork of whomever. But you know, many times the cover doesn't always reflect what is happening inside the comic. The 52 weekly stuff, I mean, those covers really did tell a story in and of themselves, and it was relevant to what was inside the issue. And you know, I believe it was towards the end of that, that's when, and that they started to count down, correct, at the end, towards the that run where it counted down, like, you know, the weeks and things like that.
Well, that was actually on the Countdown to Final Crisis the next week.
Countdown. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, because the problem is when you have something as successful as 52, the weekly series, guess what everybody wants you to do?
Another one. Yeah.
And we actually we did that. I mean, for weekly series, I mean, we did a lot. We did 52, then we did Countdown to Final Crisis, then we did Trinity. Each time we changed the formula a little bit just to see how the work would differently. Then we did a short weekly series, which was Wednesday Comics, which was a lot of fun. And then we did, which were the last two we did, which was Batman Eternal, and then the Future's End. Yeah. So those were, after that, then I think we're all dead. No, I think we did one with Earth. We did one with the Earth 2 too. So needless to say, we really get every drop out of that stone, so to speak.
Earth 2 was awesome, by the way. I was disappointed when that ended.
Yeah.
I was like, really? There's no more of these? I have to ask you, from since you mentioned him, who was pivotal in bringing Jeff Johns in to DC? Because I'm gonna just fanboy out for a second. I freaking love him.
Yeah.
As you can see, I have a whole, you know, like Blackest Night and you know, Green Lantern fanboy up on top there. So I mean, he got me into Green Lantern, and as well as many other things.
Right.
But his last issue, and I'm not ashamed to admit this, I almost cried reading it. And I read it. I took time out of work at the time. I was working in an office, and I took my lunch. I read the comic, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, wow, this is heavy, man, because it ended. And, you know, look, I know the comic wasn't going to end. There was going to be a new series after that.
Right.
For me, in my mind, that book ended. Anything that happens.
Yeah, no.
That was okay. I'm like, all the crap that comes after this, not crap, but all the stuff that happens after this, it's going to be sandwiched in here, and that last issue is it for me, because it was perfect. And I remember calling my wife. I'm like, I read this issue and I don't know what to do with myself, and I think I'm going to go home. She's like, just go back to your desk and shut up. But it was, you know, I say this because what I appreciate about him and people like him is that he did his homework. You know, like,
it's such an important statement. Yeah.
He would make references, or there would be references in those books to things that happened 30 years ago, and like a tiny panel. And the fact that Necron was the big bad of that.
Yeah.
I scrambled to go out and get the comic where he made his appearance. And I'm like, he was not a major deal in that issue when he made his first appearance. And the fact that he's the big bad in this, I was like, this is a big deal. So the story in and of itself, but knowing that all this went into that made me appreciate it even more.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you a couple of funny stories, because Jeff and I go way back. I'll go to mainframe first, though. So I'm going to tell you, this is a funny little story. So this goes to mainframe. So I get a phone call. I'm working at mainframe. I get a phone call from Richard Donner's office. They want to come and pitch me. I'm like, mainframe. I'm like, this is awesome. I can't wait to meet Richard Donner. I'm like so excited. I mean, really, awesome. There's like certain things you really want to see. Like Richard Donner, somebody I definitely wanted to meet, like beyond belief. So when the meeting takes place, Richard Donner's not there, but Jeff Johns and Kevin Feige are there, coming from Richard Donner's office. And I'm like, who the hell are these guys? Where the hell is Richard Donner? and I was being really nice, but I couldn't wait to get them out of my office because I'm like, Richard Donner didn't show up. And Jeff's pitching me Stargirl. And I said, yeah, no, I'm familiar with the Stargirl comic. And he told me the whole series. And he was trying to, I think he was feeling out whether or not there's ways to work computer animation. And we had a really nice conversation and sort of just went away. But then when I got to DC, and Jeff had done some work at DC, and we bonded over Flash. He was on Flash. He loved Flash desperately, but he was having a difficulty. So I went back to talk about, you just said, I went back and I read his entire run of Flash. And I went back and I read everything he wrote. And I said, this is what's working. This is what's not working. This is how we could do this, this, and that. And that's why got the Ignition storyline going. I think it was like right after the 200. And right at that point, then it was starting, he's cooking with gas, but he's also doing some work over Marvel. I think he was working on Avengers or something like that. And at that point, I started realizing that Marvel had this seductive lure that kept on pulling people away from DC, and I had to find ways to bring people to DC and lock them down. And so I started to lock up some exclusive contracts. Judd Winnick was my first one at DC. And then ultimately, Jeff and I talked, and I forgot, we were at some convention in some bar somewhere, and he pitches me his Teen Titans story and Green Lantern. And let me tell you, both of those were battles for me internally for a couple of reasons. First one was Green Lantern. Naturally, I'm bringing back Hal Jordan. I'm going to undo, which is almost sacrosanct. But I said to everybody, and I was kidding, but I was deadly serious. I said, listen, we could talk about Hal Jordan being dead, but he's appeared in more comics dead than he has in alive. He's been in, you know what I mean? Every opportunity to tell a flashback story with him as Green Lantern, he's wearing a mask as a ghost as Green Lantern. Still wearing his domino mask. Right. Like, so we're not getting away from this. So let's just embrace it and run with it. And Jeff has a really good take. And it was a long talk. And then we launch it and it works. And it's like, son of a bitch. Okay, And then next Jeff was on Teen Titans. He goes, I got an idea for Teen Titans. And I knew what it was because we've been talking about it for so long. So I go in, we want to relaunch Teen Titans with Jeff. And they said, look, the Teen Titans book that was out at that moment, the Titans book and the Young Justice books at that moment weren't working. They were fading quickly. And I said, we got something we're ready to launch right on the heels of this. And they said, no, you got to put it on and the old logic was you used to put something on a shelf and let it sit for 3 to 5 years, rebuild interest, get excitement going again, get people talking about it again, and then you relaunch. And I said, no, we got something that's so good, we're ready to go right now. But it's going to be a new number one. Sort of broke the rules of DC at the moment. And again, big discussion. So we did Judgment Day, that basically shut down the 2 books. And then we launched with Titans and Outsiders. And Titans tripled the sales of the Titans book, and Outsiders over doubled the sales of the Young Justice book when they launched. And that was the moment that we said, okay, now we're going to try everything. At that moment, everything was in play. And it was a real pivotal moment because we really rolled the dice. And if it failed, I don't think I would have had the same juice inside the company to be able to try different things. But because they worked, they did. So I'm always beholden to Jeff for those 2 successes, then go into Infinite Crisis, and then off to the races after that. Did these. But I mean, at the early days, it was Jeff, Greg Rucka, and Judd Winnick were my guys, and I mean, they were the go-to guys. And in those first 5 years, there was at one point between Jeff, Greg, and Judd, they were on 13 titles.
Wow.
But and what was interesting is that the 13 titles they were on, though, it was Superman, Batman. There was one of the Superman books, one of the Batman books, one of the just it's one of every book. Wonder Woman, all this. So they were able to really focus and run the center story of the line so that the line felt cohesive. Yeah. And that's why it felt cohesive. It's not cohesive with a lot of planets because these three guys are just carrying this load on their shoulders. And then you bring Gail Simone in, and then you bring in Grant Morrison, and then all of a sudden it starts to break out and starts to become a thing of its own, you know?
Yeah, there was a period there, and not that it, hasn't since or before, but for me, there was that period of time when, and not to exclude any, but like there was a bunch of series. There was Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, Blackest Night, all these big events. They were all big events in and of themselves, but they really kind of all were very cohesive together. They affected one another. And I mean, I was like, Marvel can kiss my ass in this sense, because DC is banging on all cylinders. I am caring about characters that I haven't cared about in ages. I mean, like Blue Beetle dying. I was like, what the biggest kick in the gut that is. How do you do that to him? And the fact that
Max Lord, no less, was horrible.
It was, and it was heart-wrenching. And, not to mention any other, like Sue Dibney dying and, all it was, wow. And I can get into the artwork and Identity Crisis. That was just, and I think we have a chance that we're going to be talking to Rex Morales next month. And I'll be fanboying about him about that.
That's when he still has the pages. He never sold the pages.
I said, really? Wow.
I don't think he sold the pages. Yeah, I think he's holding on to them. Yeah.
His artwork just evoked so much emotion.
Yeah,
it was.
That's why it was on that book. That's why it was there. Because there's certain things. I mean, there's very few artists that can really get that level. I mean, Marvel had a couple of things. You have Brian Hitch on a certain level there. Mm-hmm. Gary Frank brings you that stuff too.
Yes.
But Rags really just knocked it out of the park in that book. He had that gravitas to.
Yes.
Because it's such a hard story to tell, and we all say this. Yeah. It was interesting because when we did Identity Crisis, I didn't know if it was going to get approved or not. I'll be honest with you. But Brad is such a dedicated writer and such a great writer that he wrote the entire story, and then I got it for approval. I didn't get approval on a pitch sheet. I got approval because of the whole thing. But what was great about it was that because it was fully written and approved, and then the art started, then we were able to really work the company to make sure we messaged it properly and laid the story out properly and got it out for review properly. Do you know what I mean? Because you didn't want people just pulling segments out to talk about it. You wanted somebody to understand the beginning, middle, and end of the story. And I think that's what helped it land so well, was because people could read the entire book from beginning, middle to end and understand what it was, so they can contextualize the harder moments in that story. And again, it really became one of those stamps to say, we're out here. We're out here for keeps. We're playing for keeps right now. We're playing for some ways that made people uncomfortable with DC, but anxious and excited to see what was coming next. And that was it. There was a comfort factor to DC. It was, it's I used to call DC Comics was like dancing with your sister. It was like the thing.
I'm an only child, but I can only assume.
Yeah, okay, but it's like nobody else is going to dance. It's like everybody else is spoken for, so I'm going to go dance with my sister. So we had to break that. We had to break that sensibility, and we wanted to be the first date.
That's hilarious
for everyone.
So I wanted to ask, as a comic book fan, I'm not aware of this, but you were a co-publisher with Jim Lee. Yeah. And is that common, that
it's common for, believe it or not, it's common for Warner Brothers, not publishing, but the split positions is a very Warner Brothers thing. They did that a lot within the company. Okay. Because what they did is they found competing skill sets and they put them together. Okay. And, look, I like I said, as much as everybody, I put my success to Jim in a weird way, not because of the co-publishing thing, but because of Hush. Because when I first walked in the door, at DC, and I tell the story. When I first walked into DC, like I said, I was 20 years of TV and 15 seconds of publishing by the time I'm executive editor. So there's nothing worse to take somebody who thinks they know what they're doing and put them in charge.
I've seen that, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But the good part is I had so many good people working for me. But what happened was we were trying a lot of different things. And I was trying to, I really spent my first 2 years trying to restructure the operational systems and the working attitude more than the storytelling itself. So the story was suffering a little bit because the gears were grinding behind the scenes. You know what I mean? We're changing editorial, we're changing patterns, we're changing how we do things. And you could feel the machine, but it's, as Paul used to say, it's a battleship. So it takes a while for this thing to turn. But then Jim does Hush. Okay. Now Hush, this is what's important about Hush. Hush was built originally to be like Long Halloween, a series of high-end, special books on the side, 1 to 12, and that's it. But Jim goes, no, I want to be the main Batman artist. I want to be in the main Batman book, and I don't need a #1. I'll go on the regular line. Okay. And you're like, what? And I'm like, and what that does, it does a couple of things. It makes being the regular artist on the regular book sexy again. Now everybody wants to be the artist of the book rather than doing these special projects on the side, #1. #2, but Jim's no fool. He goes, I want good paper. I want good paper stock. And we were all on newsprint at the time. So all of a sudden we got the slow upgrade of the main line of paper stock. So we started to compete visually as well, which was a very important decision. And third, all of a sudden we have a sales success. We have a #1 book. And now all of a sudden DC is making a #1 book. And now it's like, wait a minute, there's something going on here. So while that book's getting all its attention and everything else is sort of trying to be figured out underneath it, nobody's noticing what's not working. They're only seeing what is working. So you get that book, and then you get Superman, Batman right behind that by a few months with Loeb and McGinnis. And all of a sudden we're getting a buzz. And by the time Superman, Batman hits, we got it figured out. We got a plan, Yeah. And now all of a sudden, but he gave us, as I said, he gave me a year's worth of fire cover to get to the plan, And if I didn't have that, it probably would have happened was you would have overthought, tried to commit. You would have tried to do something to fix something too quickly without, and then you would have just been scrambling and you never had your feet on the ground. But he gave us enough protection so that we were able to get our feet on the ground. So that was great. So Jim and I became, we became friends. And plus also I liked what they were doing at Wildstorm. I liked the art style. I liked what was happening over there. And we were constantly trying to find ways for the two groups to work together. So we were in contact all along. But when we put up as co-publishers, I didn't know what to expect. And I'm going to say something that nobody believes, but I'll say it. We never had a conversation about it, ever. We never had a conversation saying, this is what your job is, this is what my job is. We sort of just did things, and he gravitated to things he liked. I gravitated to. I liked being in the nuts and bolts. He liked thinking big and figuring out ideas. He was much more the artist and the visionary. I was the guy that liked to get out there and pound the pavement and mix it up with people. So we found this really fun balance that just worked naturally. And like I said, if we had a disagreement, he would tell me very calmly what I was doing.
Yeah, I've only seen him, interviewed. He doesn't seem like the type of person that just, goes off the handle or something. What are you doing? Yeah.
No, and we had, like I said, we were always in constant contact. We're always chatting it through. And whenever I get something excited, I'd see him, and he'd do this, like fix this, do this, and then we take it out. I always joke. I said when we were up there, it's he's the artist. I was more the editor. Always, I was like, that's the logic of it. So it was a lot of fun. Honestly, I actually miss working with him because that's the one thing I miss is just that daily contact. And I used to joke, and I'll say it here. I say, do you realize, that being co-plumbers is actually a demotion from being Jim Lee? You're actually. So I always took him as I took a step up and he took a step down. So we met in the middle.
That's so funny. So you mentioned it, and I had I was going to ask you, but, you were, and, along with Jim Lee as well, the face of the company, for a very long time. And, akin to what Stan Lee was, I would say. And I think was that it seems like that was intentional.
Oh yeah, That was very intentional. Even back to when I first started as executive editor. When I started as executive editor, I wrote a manifesto about what needed to be done, and I said in that manifesto that Jim should be the face of the company. He's the most recognizable star we have. Lean into it. But at that point, he was Wallstrom. He still, even though he's the company, he wasn't the company. Even with Batman, he still wasn't the company. And at that point, he was just an artist, so he wasn't the face. So, I said, well, somebody's got to get out there and start pounding that pavement. Somebody's got to get out there and start speaking on behalf of this. Marvel's out there chatting up a storm. They're taking shots at us. We got to go back, not to get mudslinging, but we got to have some fun with it. We got to mix it up a little bit, And what people don't realize is that I was friends with Joe even before I started at DC. I knew Joe through Jimmy. When I helped, I actually knew them when they were at Event Comics and all that. So I was always in contact with Joe, and I knew him well. So there's no animosity. There was all kind of fun, but I was jealous that they were out there in a way that I felt DC to be. But because I was new, Paul was very quiet about it. He was like, you got to get your feet on the ground. You got to know what you're talking about before you start talking. And I was a bit like a pit bull on a chain. I was like, wanting to get out there, and he's pulling that chain back every chance he gets. And then, like I said, when we had that success with Green Lantern, and then we had the success with Teen Titans, and then we launched Infinite Crisis, that's when they let me off the leash, so to speak.
Got it.
It's like you got enough under your belt. Now you go. And that's when, if you notice it, that's when DC Nation took off in the back pages. And I wanted to set that conversation up. We wanted to be out there talking. We wanted to be out there mixing it up. So we took the DC Nation concept and we took it to the conventions, and it became this. I really love, what I love about comics is community. And I love that interaction. I love that argument. I love that fight. I love that screaming, ranting, this passion that comes out of you. Want to bring that passion out of people, because that's what happens. And, as I used to say, one of the most interesting things about it was we used to do these panels, and they used to be raucous. They just raucous, people yelling and shouting. We used to bring people up on stage, and we had guys yelling at us about everything from Wally West to Stephanie Brown. All those touch points. Yeah. And but it was heartfelt, and it was tried to be as respectful as possible. Sometimes lines were crossed, and we always had to quickly pull back. But for the most part, 99% of the time, it was this really heartfelt discussion about comics. And the best compliment I ever got coming out of a panel was, some guy comes to me and goes, I'm going to tell you, Dan, I love your panels. He goes, I don't learn nothing about these CC comics, but I have the best time in my life. And I said, perfect. Because I used to hate being the guy that went to the convention. And I always do this imitation. We used to be in a convention before we started to do it the way we're doing it. And people would sit there going, I'm really excited to be on the Batman book. You have a lot of big plans. You're going to be shocked to see what we do. It's really amazing. I'm so excited to be here. And I love this job. I'm like, what?
That's funny. It's like, the old Kevin Smith before he got real famous. And then now when he talks, he's like, wow, it's
you have to get out there. You have to get that emotion and energy, because there's so much dedication. People care about these characters more than most of their own families, it feels like, when we're out there. And they're, and the one thing I hear that it took me a while to understand it, and it was a hard one to address, is when people call me and they said, I just want to know my characters are going to be all right. I said, what? It's like, I just want to make sure they're okay. And I'm like, they're okay. And
you mean the make-believe characters that are
and you don't want to say
they're fine. They're fine.
But that's what it's like. And I mean, Paul Levitt said it best to me. He goes, when I first started there, when I first got the job as the editor, he goes, here's the deal. I'm going to give you the toy box. And he goes like this. He goes, and you can play with every toy in the toy box, but you only have one rule. One rule. I said, what's that rule, Paul? He goes, you got to put them back the way you found them when you're done.
That's what he said, the word for word what you said just now when we spoke to him. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. The fact that you just said that gave me goosebumps. That's fantastic.
No, I'm serious. That was carried it from that was what he told me almost the first month I was there. Wow. So I carried that with me always. So I'm like, I'm going to break them. Trust me, but I promise you, I'm going to put them back in. Just like you're not even going to know it's going to be as good as new when I get it back. I promise you.
That's really cool. I wanted to ask, so do you think that with the rise of all the TV shows and the movies, do you think that has in any way put comics on the back burner by any?
Absolutely.
Even though it is the source material for it.
Here's the two things I say about this, and I have two very important, very things that used to be my mottos there. First one is TV and film was my competition, not Marvel Comics, without a doubt. As soon as people started to get the same type of storytelling we were in our books, on TV and film, reading the comics became superfluous. We no longer became the place for the story, And the worst thing that happens, and when I see things like that, is you almost become, if you're following their creative direction, then you're almost becoming a licensee of your own characters. Meaning you're basically not in charge of the narrative. They are. Someone else is outside of your offices. And that's when you lose control, because ultimately on a scale of viewers or readers or whatever, comics is such a minor fraction of that they become superfluous, insignificant. So if we can't be getting the sales numbers up there, that's why it was so important for me to push the story forward ahead of what they were doing in film and TV, because they burn through a lot of story very fast in television and film. And you see this going through because they get to cherry pick, right. So they're using all the best stuff, but they're eating it. It's like a giant machine just chewing this all up. So you've got to stay ahead of them, because if they pass you and then they start to control the creative direction or the voice of the show or the book, then ultimately that's the bigger audience. That's going to become the lore, not what you create. So you got to create the lore ahead of them so that it becomes their lore, but it services what you do, and that's what's important. So those are the two challenges, because ultimately the interesting thing is when they adapt you cleanly and they adapt you something that you did, the source material sells extraordinarily well in the graphic novel business. The classic story is for DC Comics. This is the high watermark, the benchmark. Never hit it again, but this is to show you where it was. When they showed the trailer to Watchmen at the end of Dark Knight movie, right? Mm-hmm. And then the Watchmen movie premieres 8 months later. 8 months later, it's January. I think it was like July to March, something like that. Whatever the amount of time is. DC Comics sold 1 million copies of Watchmen graphic novels in that window. And that's a book that was out for 20 years at that time. Yeah. But the fact that trailer landed so well and it was so true to what the source material was, people ran to the source material to learn about it before the movie premiered. And we had this incredible selling period before then. And basically that became the model of what we were trying to do. And when we did New 52 was about creating clear interpretations that were able to move forward into other medium, as well as giving a jumping point, or for some people, jumping off point for DC Comics. When you see a lot of the film and TV stuff right now, and it's reliant on a lot of things created in New 52, that means it accomplished its goal. But now that they're mining that, then the necessary job was to jump ahead of that. So while they were mining New 52, you're creating the next thing, so that you stay ahead of it. So that was the structural plan on how to make that all work.
Wow. So I have to ask you, are you happy with New 52, or with maybe No 52 going forward, or however you want to?
Okay, that implies that I'm happy with something.
You got to be happy with something.
Yeah, I am. You know what? Honestly, it's hard. It's hard because you come in, you're full of piss and vinegar when you first come in. You know what I mean? And I go from you talk about Identity Crisis, and for me, it's really Countdown to Infinite Crisis, that 80-page giant, to the end of the 52 weekly series. That's my sweet spot. That's my heart. That's my heart and soul right there. That's everything that happens that period of time.
I reread those. I didn't mean to cut you off, but like that's the stuff that I reread.
Yeah, that's execution to the way I thought it was supposed to be always. And then things happen and things get out of the way. But 52 for all intents and purposes, was a monster project, and it was done for a very particular reason. So the goals that we set forth for the New 52 were accomplished. So it's a win there.
Yeah.
It relaunched, it refocused the line, got new starting points, it got us a chance to revamp talent, to change a point. So we got a lot of things that worked there. On the hit or miss basis, the thing that I really wanted out of New 52 didn't occur. Okay. You know, like I said, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, you can argue about what happened there, but I still love Grant Morrison's Superman in Action Comics because that was something different and something unique about that. But what I really wanted with things like, you know, like the Frankenstein book or the Swamp Thing book or the Animal Man book, all those quirky corners of the DC universe to get back alive again. And they worked up to a point, but they sort of faded. And I was hoping that we were going to be able to really bring the diversity of line back in the different styles and different types of story. But ultimately we started to collapse back into superheroes again. And that's where I felt I wish we were able to really keep that alive. Because if you go back to when I first read comics, you go back to the 70s, if you go back and look at the 70s, superheroes for DC was only 40% of its line, only 40%. So that means there was all these mystery books and war books and Westerns and, you know, and Tarzan and all this crazy stuff, you know, and the romance books, all that stuff was happening. And that's DC to me, you know, that's my DC. My DC is not just, if I wanted superheroes, listen, they were doing that really good over at Marvel, but if you want this real crazy mix of stuff, then that was where DC was at. And I was always trying to bring back that crazy mix, but just wasn't in the cards, you know, just wasn't in the cards, you know.
I want to say as a fan telling you that I enjoyed New 52.
Oh, great.
You know, there were some things, you know, and, you know, comics, like anything, food, music, art, it's very subjective. There are things you like, things you don't like. And, you know, there are aspects of it that where I was like, all right, well, you know, look, again, it's comics, things, it expands, it contracts, things change, and they always go back. I don't get hung up on, you know, Superman's outfit, you know, underwear being on the outside versus inside, whatever. You know, the heart and soul of the character remains the same. I liked the fact that there were eyes on characters that hadn't been on them before, which I always appreciate. And, you know, you always have your, you know, like I leave these here. I can always go back to them and read them. And I'm always, but as a comic book fan, you know, you want to be able to read other stuff that's out there. And that's what I appreciated of that, that line. I will say, I was disappointed. The one thing I was disappointed of going away is when you mentioned Teen Titans and Outsiders, and I was man, that shit was banging for me, and I was like, this is awesome, and then it wasn't around anymore, and I was like,
I listen. That's a tough one.
I was like, I was sad about that.
You know, listen, those there's a lot of stuff. Like I said, if you go back and think about it, for me, New 52 for that first year was awesome. Because it was we spent so much time preparing for it that it was the first year was the execution of all the plans. But as things were moving faster and books were failing or coming up and things like that, the level of input and attention to detail to revamp and renew was sort of fading. So it just seemed like they were just dusting things off rather than polishing them up. So that's when things got confusing, because they were sort of half thought out and half new, and then everything seems to get into a little bit of a malaise. But part of that was our own creation. We got a little arrogant because it launched so big that ultimately what happened was, you know, we created these thresholds for books to sell, and if they didn't hit that threshold, then they were canceled. So we created a churn, meaning that there are certain books that were good that we should have just stuck with and let them to continue on, then churning them out and trying to constantly fill that bucket. Because ultimately, once that you spend so much energy trying to keep that bottom from falling out that you started to lose attention on the top end of it too. And I was bringing talent from the top to help support the bottom, and it just became a little more wobbly as it was going on. So at the end of the day, I'm so glad we did it. We had to do it. It was just one of those moments in time, because what people don't talk about is where the comic book business was at that time. There wasn't a book selling over 70,000 copies at that moment in time. And when New 52 broke, there wasn't a book selling under 40.
Wow.
You know, so of the 52 books, every book sold over 40,000 copies.
Wow.
So in the month, first 2-3 months of that. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Are you happy with the state of the comic book industry? And I don't mean MCU or TV.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about comics.
It's interesting. I think it's in a massive transition right now. That's what I really feel. And it hasn't found its form yet. That's the other side of the coin. I think, you know, because of the pandemic and the changes in distribution and so much, there's a lot of turmoil. And, you know, and I stay in touch with a lot of people, and I will never comment on the material because we have a, you know, this just, you know, we have those practices, you know, you don't comment about the, you know, you just sort of worry about your period and everything, because people are supposed to be doing something different, or else why change everything?
Right.
But the reality is, the two things, the biggest takeaways I've got out of the comic business right now, and you talk about the business,
right?
Back issue business is booming. It's carrying the day. Numbers on that are pretty crazy. Collectors numbers on that are pretty crazy. And that's good for the stores, which I'm happy for them. I'm unhappy that the variant cover business is even more prevalent now than ever before. But I don't think it's going away. I don't think so. I pulled out some old reports, 15-year-old reports, talking about wondering if variant covers are going to go away, and now they're 3 times over. My only shame of it all, fear of it all, is that nobody's caring about the interiors. You know, I said the perfect comic today is the top variant cover artist on the top character book, put in plastic and nothing on the inside, because she didn't have to even bother creating the comic itself, because nobody cared or bothered to read it. You know, and I think that's the evolution of the comic right now, and that's got to stop. You know, you got to get back again. You got to get back to characters' care. So the truth is, you got to go in places that aren't being serviced by other media, and tell stories that you can only find in that form. And by doing so, I think you'll be able to regrow a certain section of business, start over again. But I feel it's funny. I said that I started collecting in the 70s. I'm going to say I'm feeling very 1970s right now, if you want to be perfectly honest. I feel that if Marvel and DC cede a lot of this convention space to a lot of the mid-range companies or the independents or the individuals, their chances of their books are going to be found. There are a lot of people walking through shows. That's the one thing that's going to happen again. I mean, I did about 4 conventions in between October and November. September. Yeah, about 4 conventions, and 2 of them had over 100,000 people at them. Wow. And that's a win. And without Marvel and DC, they're sucking the air out of the room. A lot of these younger guys can get a chance to be seen and be heard and be found. And you got to root for them, because those are the guys that are going to carry the day. They're the ones going to, they're the ones who are there for the love and care of the business. Because it's certainly not there for the money. So they're there for the love and care, and those are the people you want to see succeed. And I'm always rooting for them.
So my last question for you is, what's next for you?
There is a next. It's just not time yet. It's just not time yet. But it's good. Is I had a couple of things that I was doing that kept me intrigued. I enjoy talk. My problem is that I enjoy things like this because I enjoy talking comics. I get a chance to talk comics again. If somebody wants to listen, I'm ready to go.
I'm here. I'll listen. I could talk to you for another hour, but you have a life. I have a life. I don't have much of a life, but I have one.
It's funny. I've been working with the company. We just did a book on the history of the pulps through Street and Smith pulps. Cool. Which was rather interesting, because I didn't know the history of pulps, and it was fun for me to work on something that I wasn't deeply versed in the knowledge of. And it gave me a chance to work in an area that I get to learn. It gave me a chance to work with some talent that I used to work with, to be able to get some support on that. So that was a lot of fun. I did some teaching with the Kubert School, which I was enjoying as well. That was a lot of fun as well. But now I feel, now that everything's starting to start up again, I figure the new year will be interesting. So we'll have some fun with that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next for you, because I was very much a fan of yours. I appreciated your comic book work, as well as the work you did management wise or publishing wise in DC. I wanted more than anything to actually work at DC for years ago. Still do.
They're hiring, so you still have time.
You know what? We got to go. I got to get my resume ready.
Wait till the Discovery thing's over.
I don't want to move to LA or California, but
it's a different life. It's a different life. I love the East Coast.
it was. I interviewed there ages ago before
Really?
ages. There was a period of time after my cool job when I graduated college where I was selling insurance just to fill a need to have a job, and I had the opportunity to interview for a licensing job. And I went to the DC offices in, was it Times Square or close to there?
Yeah. 1700 Broadway.
Yes. And I saw the offices, and it was because of the way that office looked that I was determined to make my office basement look the same with all the stuff. I mean, just like, walking through, and I saw Mr. Freeze's suit in a case, and I was interviewing with whoever the licensing executive was at the time, and just seeing like this maquettes and statues. I'm like, this is what I'm going to do professionally. Nothing, I don't know, but my office is going to look.
Honestly, those New York offices, it's a special time there. That was honestly for my closing. I think when we closed that office, we lost a lot of heart of the place. A lot of good people we had to leave behind, which was a shame. But that was a special working environment, to be honest with you. It was
DC, and to extent Marvel also, it was synonymous with New York. And I was, and of course, not that I was working there or not that I had any kind of relationship with anyone there, but when I heard that both of those companies were leaving New York, I was like, ouch, really? Oh, that's a
Marvel's still there. That's the good part. The Marvel guys are still there.
Oh, are they real? I thought, okay.
It just feels like that because so much of the problem for Marvel is so much of the focus now is on the film and TV world,
which is
that the comic book world almost feels superfluous. But all that TV's out, TV and film around LA, but the comics, they're still churning away in New York.
Yeah, but I want to work for DC, no more. So.
You know what? It was a really great place to work at. All kidding aside, the people there are great. The characters are fabulous. You can have a blast. Honestly, if you went to 10-year-old Dan Didio and asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, I actually fulfilled one of those wishes. So I wanted to be Stan Lee, but I got to be at DC, which is what I was reading the most at the time. So it worked great.
If it's any consolation at all to you, I have to say, my kids who are 6, they in terms of people in comic books, they recognize Stan Lee, and they also recognize you and Jim Lee.
Yeah.
And just because, they're just exposed to it. They don't, we've interviewed other people, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, they don't know them from Adam, but they'll recognize, like, oh, that's the guy from DC, or that's the guy from Marvel. They know it. So, it's mission accomplished for you.
And now Jim's the guy with the Muppets. He always gets the good jobs.
Dude, I saw that, and I told my wife, I'm like,
it's so cool.
She goes, oh, look,
there's the coolest goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
I was so excited for him. So excited.
Yeah, I was like, holy shit, look at this. She was like, what? You're getting excited for the new puppet? I'm like, well, no, the guy next to the new puppet.
Yeah. This is my closing story, because the only time I ever came out ahead on Jim, the only time, we're in a cab together in Chicago at Chicago Convention, and we're going to a meeting, and the cab driver, and I'm sitting there talking to the cab driver, and I'm sitting there talking to Jim, and the cab driver turned around and goes, "Hey, you Dan Didio?" And I said, "Yeah."
There you go.
I thought I owed him money. He goes, I listened to you on all the DVDs. He goes, I listen to you on all the DVDs. It's really great what you have to say. And I said, well, I'm sitting here with Jim Lee. He goes, no, you're the guy that I always listen to. And I'm like, score. That's it. I should have married that cab driver.
That's awesome. Hey, welcome back. That was our interview with Dan Didio. I'm still in awe the fact that he agreed to talk to us. He was absolutely great to talk to. Again, I was super nervous prior to opening my mouth, but as soon as we started chatting, I was absolutely at ease. I absolutely respected his candor and honesty about everything we discussed, and I held off. I wasn't sure if I should have done so, but I asked about New 52. And he did not shy away. He was absolutely open and honest, and I respect his answer. So it was if that was the last interview we did, and it's not, I would have been a happy camper.
Yeah, he was a joy to talk to, setting this thing up. Nicest guy. You could tell through the interview, you guys had a great time talking. And like you said, he is still a very big and very influential name in this business. And I think there's a lot left to come from Dan Didio in the comic book worlds, going forward.
What a way to kick off 2022 for the Dollar Bin Bandits. We have a big lineup for this year. Already have a bunch of interviews in the can coming up. So please tell your friends, rate, review, and subscribe. We got a couple great new reviews on Apple Podcasts. So check those out. They're speaking truth. We appreciate it. Hit us up on social. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram. You know all the handles. DB Bandits on Twitter, Dollar Bin Bandits on Facebook and Instagram, dollarbinbandits@gmail.com if you want to get real personal with us. And that's it. I mean, enjoy this first interview. Enjoy the interviews that are to come. We want to bring you more. So keep following us, keep subscribing, and we'll see you next time.